The stars were never meant to be a burden. In the ancient scrolls kept in the great library of the North, the stars were celebrated as guides for lost travelers and silent witnesses to the promises of lovers. But for Elowen, the stars were not celestial lights in the sky. They were a curse written in glowing, golden ink upon her very flesh. She stood perfectly still in the center of her cell, her breath hitching in the damp, stagnant air. The Blood Oak Pack's dungeons were carved directly into the mountain's roots, and the stone always felt like it was drinking the warmth from her body. Above her, a narrow, iron-barred grate allowed a single sliver of moonlight to pierce the darkness. When that light touched her skin, the magic responded. Elowen looked down at her trembling hands. Golden lines, thin as spider silk, but bright as molten sun, crawled across her palms and spiraled up her forearms. They weren't just markings. They were alive. Every time the moon shifted its phase, the ink moved. It was a slow, agonizing process, a sensation of 1,000 frozen needles stitching a path through her muscle and into her very marrow. She was an Omega. In a world where the hierarchy of the pack was the only law, being born without a wolf was a death sentence of the soul. Her brother and sisters had shifted years ago, their bodies exploding into powerful forms of grey and brown fur. But Elowen remained trapped in her human skin, small and fragile. She was the freak of the Blood Oak, the girl whose only power was to be a literal piece of property. Her father, Alpha Tiberius, had made sure she never forgot her worthlessness. He didn't see a daughter when he looked at her. He saw a ledger. He saw a map to a power that had been lost for a millennium. Chapter 1. The heavy iron door of the cell screeched open. Elowen didn't need to look up to know who it was. The scent arrived first, a suffocating foul cloud of stale ale, wet earth, and the metallic tang of old blood that never seemed to wash off her father's hands. Alpha Tiberius stepped into the room, his massive frame casting a shadow that swallowed the moonlight. He didn't speak at first. He simply watched the way the golden lines on Elowen's collarbone pulsed with a rhythmic, hypnotic light. He reached out with a rough, calloused hand and gripped her shoulder, turning her toward the torchlight. Elowen winced, her skin prickling with revulsion. "It is finished," Tiberius rumbled, his voice like the grinding of heavy stones. "The map has anchored itself to the forbidden peaks. Do you feel it, girl? Do you feel the mountain calling its key home?" Elowen's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. "Father, please," she whispered, her voice sounding like dry leaves on stone. "The map. It's drawing from my life force. Every time it glows this bright, I feel my spirit thinning. If you force me to guide them into the mists, I won't survive. The magic will bleed me until there's nothing left." Tiberius's grip tightened, his fingernails digging into her skin. He leaned down, his breath hot against her ear. "You are an Omega. You have no wolf to hunt for this pack, and your womb is likely as empty as your soul. Your only value, the only reason I didn't leave you in the woods for the crows, is that ink. The lords of the 5 territories are waiting in the hall. They have brought chests of gold just for the chance to own you. You will lead them to the primal heart, or I will let my lowest-ranking soldiers use you until you wish for death." He threw her toward the door. Elowen stumbled, her bare feet hitting the frigid stone floor. As the guards grabbed her arms, her own scent, the delicate, soft aroma of crushed lavender and morning rain, was almost entirely extinguished by the heavy, choking scent of her own terror. Chapter 2. The great hall of the Blood Oak Pack was a cavern of noise and heat. Huge bonfires roared in the pits, casting flickering orange light over the faces of 100 predators. Shifters from the desert packs, the coastal clans, and the southern forests had gathered, their aggressive auras clashing like physical waves. Ellawen felt the eyes on her the moment she stepped onto the raised wooden platform. She stood in the center, her long, tangled dark hair falling over her face like a veil of shame. Tiberius stepped behind her, a triumphant sneer on his face. "Behold," he roared, his voice echoing in the high stone rafters, "the living map, the only guide to the tomb of King Bran." With a violent motion, he ripped the linen shift from her shoulders, baring her back and arms to the crowd. A deafening silence fell over the hall. The golden lines on Ellawen's skin reacted to the collective greed of the room. They flared with a sudden, violent radiance, turning her skin into a glowing beacon. The lines traced the jagged path through the Forbidden Mountains, showing hidden passes and ancient gates that hadn't been seen by mortal eyes in 1,000 years. "She has no wolf!" someone shouted from the tables. "She'll die before we even reach the foothills." "Then you'd better move fast," Tiberius laughed. "The bidding starts at 5,000 gold bars. Who wants to claim the power of the first Alpha?" The hall erupted. 7,000! An Alpha from the south yelled, his eyes yellow with lust as he stared at Ellawen's bare skin. 10,010 of my best warriors, another countered. Ellawen closed her eyes. She felt the heat of their gazes like actual flames. She felt the pulse of the map under her skin, growing hotter and faster, as if the magic itself was trying to scream for help. She was being bartered like a horse, a piece of meat, while her own father stood behind her, counting his imaginary riches. Then, the massive oak doors at the far end of the hall were thrown open. They didn't just open, they were blasted back by a force that made the fires in the pits shudder and turn blue. A new scent flooded the room, cutting through the heavy smell of fur and mead like a frost wind. It was a scent Ellawen had never experienced: crushed obsidian, cold iron, and the haunting lonely smoke of a dying fire. It was a scent that demanded submission. It was the scent of a king. The crowd parted like water before a blade. A man stalked into the light. He was terrifyingly tall, his broad shoulders draped in the midnight black furs of the northern wastes. A mask of dark, forged steel obscured the upper half of his face, leaving only a sharp, scarred jawline and a mouth set in a grim, immovable line. "Commander Zarek," a voice whispered in the back of the hall, the tone filled with pure, unadulterated dread. "The shadow of the king." Zarek didn't look at the Alphas. He didn't look at the gold. He walked straight toward the auction block, his heavy, fur-lined boots thudding against the stone with the finality of a funeral bell. Chapter 3. As Zarek approached, Ellawen felt a sensation she couldn't explain. It wasn't fear, not the kind she felt for Tiberius. It was a magnetic, agonizing pull that started deep in the core of her body. Her dormant wolf, the silent ghost she had spent 18 years mourning, suddenly sat up in her mind. Mine. The word echoed in her soul, a low, primal growl. The shadow is ours. The golden lines on Ellawen's skin responded to Zarek's proximity, with a violence that made her gasp. They turned from amber to a brilliant, burning white. The map was no longer static. The gold began to flow like liquid fire across her shoulders, reaching out towards the man in the steel mask as if trying to bridge the gap between them. Zarek stopped at the foot of the platform. He reached up, his large gloved hand moving with a slow, deliberate grace that made Ellawen's breath catch. He caught her chin, and tilted her face up. For the first time in her life, Elowen didn't look at the floor. She looked into the slits of that steel mask. She couldn't see his eyes, but she felt them, searing, intense, and filled with a strange, ancient sorrow that matched her own. "I am not here to bid." Zarek's voice was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the wooden boards and into the soles of Alozin's feet. It was a voice made of granite and command. Tiberius stepped forward, his ego struggling against the crushing weight of Zarek's power. "Commander, the auction has rules. The Ironhold Pack has no claim here unless they pay the only rule is that the king takes what is his," Zarek interrupted, his hand moving to the hilt of a massive black-bladed sword at his hip. "This woman is not a guide for your petty squabbles. She is the key to the north, and she is leaving with me." Tiberius, blinded by greed, reached for Elowen's arm. "She is my property! I grew her! I bled her!" In a flash of motion that no human or normal shifter could follow, Zarek was on the platform. He didn't even draw his sword, he simply struck. A single, backhanded blow from his forearm sent Alpha Tiberius flying across the hall. The great Alpha crashed into the stone hearth, his ribs snapping with a sound like dry kindling. The rest of the hall went deathly silent. No one moved to help Tiberius. They were too busy lowering their heads, their wolves whimpering in the presence of the shadow. Zarek turned back to Elowen. He saw her shivering, her skin still glowing with that frantic white light. Without a word, he unbuckled his massive fur cloak and draped it over her shoulders. The interior was lined with soft, warm silk, and carried his scent, iron, pine, and a hint of ancient magic. It enveloped her like a shield, the first piece of protection she had ever known. When his fingers grazed the sensitive skin of her neck to fasten the clasp, Elowen felt a jolt of electricity, so fierce her knees gave out. Zarek caught her, his arms like iron bars around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. "Do not look back, Elowen," he whispered, his voice a low, private promise against her ear. "The world of the Blood Oak is dead to you. The one I am taking you to is made of ice and secrets." Chapter 4. The transition from the heat of the hall to the freezing night was a shock to Elowen's system. Zarek lifted her onto the back of a midnight black stallion, a beast so large it looked like it was born of nightmare. He mounted behind her, his body a solid wall of heat against her back, his heartbeat steady and slow. They rode for hours, leaving the territory of the Blood Oak behind. They climbed higher and higher, the air growing thin and sharp. The moon was a giant silver eye watching them from above. Elowen felt the map on her ribs pulsing in sync with the horse's gallop, as if the earth itself were pulling the gold out of her skin. "Why?" Elowen finally whispered, the wind whipping her hair into her face. "If the king is a legend, if he has been asleep for a century, why do you serve a man made of stone?" Zarek slowed the horse as they reached a high mountain ridge. Below them lay a valley of black ice, stretching into infinity. He dismounted and reached up to lift her down. His hands lingered on her waist, his thumbs tracing the golden lines that were now glowing through the silk of the cloak. He turned her to face the peaks. Then he reached up and slowly removed his steel mask. Elowen gasped. He was beautiful, but it was a rugged, tragic beauty. His face was marked by the scars of 100 battles, his brow etched with a silver line. But his eyes, they were the same molten, glowing gold as the map on her skin. "King Bran is not a legend, Elowen," Zarek said, his voice dropping to a pained, intimate whisper. "He is my heart. A century ago, A witch split the Alpha King in two. She turned his body to stone and left his wolf spirit to wander the world in the body of his commander. I am his shadow. I have his memories, his strength, but I have no soul. It is trapped in that mountain, waiting for the woman whose blood can melt the ice. Elaven reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the scar on his jaw. Then, you are the one I was mapped for. I am the man who must deliver you to him, Zarek said, his voice breaking. And my curse is to fall in love with the only woman who can erase me from existence. A low musical chuckle echoed from the shadows of a nearby pine tree. Elowen jumped, the map on her arms flaring white with alarm. A man appeared from behind the tree, looking as if he had stepped out of a high society parlor. He had messy copper hair and eyes the color of toxic emeralds. He wore a long, purple velvet coat and a silver locket that hummed with a dark, vibrating energy. Adrian, Zarek growled, his obsidian sword sliding from its sheath with a ring that silenced the wind. Now, Commander, the magician said, waving a lazy ring-covered hand. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to check on my investment. You made a deal with me in my shop a year ago to find the map. Remember? I gave you the coordinates to the Blood Oak Pack, and I always collect. Adrian's gaze slid to Elowen, his green eyes scanning her with clinical fascination. Beautiful. The living map is even more radiant than the legend said. But tell me, little Elowen, has your brave commander told you the real price of waking the king? Elowen looked at Zarek's rigid back. What price? Adrian stepped closer, the snow melting into steam wherever he stepped. The map is not just ink, my dear. It is your life force. To wake King Bran, you must pour your blood into the altar. The map will leave your skin and enter the stone. You will save the king, but you will die in the process. You will never see the sun rise on the kingdom you saved. Zarek didn't deny it. He didn't move. Through the bond, Elowen felt a wave of agonizing guilt and love roll off him, a scent of ozone and ash. What will it be, little map? Adrian asked, his voice like silk. Wither away in the snow with a man who lied to you, or make a new deal with me to save your life. Elowen looked at the golden eyes of the man she was falling for, then at the dark, hungry peaks ahead. The choice was a jagged edge, and every direction led to blood. Chapter 5. The silence that followed Adrian's departure was more crushing than the mountain air. Elowen stood frozen, the wind whipping her dark hair across her face, but she barely felt the cold. All she could feel was the weight of the words Adrian had left behind, like a poison. You will save the king, but you will die in the process. She looked at Zarek. He stood with his back to her, his massive shoulders heaving with a suppressed growl. The obsidian sword in his hand hummed with a dark, hungry energy, reflecting the silver moonlight. He looked like a god of death, a sentinel of the void, and he had known. Did you know? Elowen's voice was barely a whisper, a thin thread of sound in the vast white silence. When you pulled me from that platform, when you wrapped me in your cloak and told me I was safe, did you know I was being led to my grave? Zarek didn't turn around. His scent, usually the comforting aroma of iron and pine, was now sharp with the bitter musk of agony. I knew the legends, he rasped, his voice sounding like stone grinding against stone. I knew the key had to be a shifter of the star blood. I didn't know the map was a parasite. I didn't know it was drinking you. He turned then, and the look in his golden eyes shattered something inside Elowen. It wasn't the look of a captor. It was the look of a man watching his own soul burn. "Every woman who came before you was a volunteer. Elowen." Zarek stepped toward her, the snow crunching violently beneath his boots. "Daughters of Alphas who wanted the glory of being the king's savior. They were strong, they were warriors, and they all failed because the map refused to anchor to their skin. But you..." He reached out, his large hand trembling as he touched the glowing line on her neck. "You are an Omega. You have no wolf to protect your life force. The map chose you because you were the only one weak enough for it to hollow out." Elowen recoiled as if his touch had burned her. "Weak? You think I'm weak because I don't have a wolf?" Her eyes, usually a soft storm grey, flared with a sudden amber light. "I have survived 18 years of my father's cruelty. I have survived being a freak in my own home. I am not a battery for your king, Zarek." She turned to run, to throw herself back into the mists, but Zarek was faster. In a blur of motion, his arms were around her, pinning her against the rough bark of a pine tree. He didn't use his alpha strength to hurt her. He used his body to cage her, to keep her from the edge of the cliff. "Let me go!" she cried, her fists pounding against his hard chest. "I cannot!" Zarek roared, his face inches from hers. His breath was hot, smelling of smoke and desperation. "If you leave this ridge, Tiberius will find you. If you stay, the map will take you. There is no path that doesn't lead to blood, Elowen, but I swear to the moon, I will not let it be yours." He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled sharply, his body shuddering against hers. Through the silk of his tunic, she could feel the frantic thudding of his heart, or the king's heart. "I am a shadow," he whispered against her skin, the vibration sending shivers down her spine. "I was made to serve the king, but the man inside this shadow, he belongs to you." Chapter 6. They found shelter as the moon reached its peak, a hidden cave tucked behind a frozen waterfall. The ice acted as a prism, catching the moonlight and bathing the interior in a haunting ethereal blue. Zarek worked in silence, building a fire with seasoned wood he carried in his saddlebags. He moved with a heavy, purposeful grace, but he avoided looking at Elowen. The tension between them was a physical thing, a cord stretched so tight it hummed. Elowen sat by the fire, her body beginning to vibrate with a strange, internal heat. It wasn't the warmth of the flames, it was the map. The golden ink was pulsing with a rhythmic light, and it felt as if the lines were trying to pull themselves free from her flesh. "It hurts," she murmured, clutching her ribs. The lines on her palms were glowing so brightly, she could see the delicate bones in her hands. Zarek dropped the furs he was carrying and knelt before her. He reached for her hands, but Elowen pulled back. "Don't," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "Every time you touch me, the map grows stronger. Every time I feel your scent, my blood starts to boil. You're helping it kill me." Zarek's face twisted in pain. "I have to keep you warm, Elowen. Your human heart can't handle the mountain chill while the magic is draining your reserves." He didn't wait for her permission this time. He took her hands and pulled her into his lap. He was a furnace of alpha heat, and as he held her, Elowen felt her resistance crumbling. She was so tired of being alone. She leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes, and that's when she heard it. Rise, my little map." Elowen's eyes snapped open. "Zarek!" "I'm here," he whispered, his grip tightening. "No," she gasped, her breath clouding in the air. "It's not you. It's a voice. Inside the gold." She looked down at her shoulder. The golden lines were flowing now, moving like liquid gold under her skin. And for the first time in 18 years, she felt a presence in her mind that wasn't hers. It was a low, melodic growl, a song of power and ancient memories. "My wolf," Elowen breathed, her heart leaping with a joy so sharp it was almost painful. "Zarek, I thought I was born broken. I thought I was empty. But she's been there. She was sleeping inside the stars." Zarek didn't look happy. He looked horrified. He stared at the glowing marks on her skin as if they were a death sentence. "Elowen, listen to me," Zarek said, his voice trembling with a rare fear. "The legend of the living map is older than the Pax. It says the map is a vessel. It doesn't just lead to the king, it feeds the king. Your wolf isn't waking up because you're finding your power. She's being pulled to the surface so the stone can consume her soul to fuel Bran's resurrection." The revelation hit Elowen like a physical blow. Her wolf, the part of her she had spent her entire life praying for, was only appearing so she could be sacrificed. Not sacrifice, the wolf whispered in her mind, the voice stronger now, more defiant. "We are the storm." "She says we are the storm," Elowen told Zarek, her voice filled with a new, strange authority. Zarek looked at her, and for a moment he didn't see a fragile Omega. He saw a queen whose power was beginning to eclipse his own. The golden lines on Elohen's skin suddenly turned a deep, burning crimson, the color of a dying sun. "I don't care about the king," Elowen said, reaching up to frame Zarek's face with her glowing hands. "And I don't care about the north. If I have a wolf for only one night, then I will spend that night with the man who fought for me." Zarek let out a low, primal groan. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "You are the most dangerous thing I have ever encountered, Elowen. You are making me want to let the world freeze just to keep you in my arms." He kissed her then, a desperate, bruising kiss that tasted of snow and fire. It was the kiss of a man who was ready to commit treason against the gods. Chapter 7. The second morning brought a sky the color of a bruised plum. They reached the great obsidian bridge, a narrow arch of black glass that spanned a bottomless chasm between the two highest peaks. "We are close," Zarek said, his steel mask back in place, though he kept one hand firmly on Elowen's waist as they crossed. "The primal heart is just beyond the mist." But as they reached the center of the bridge, a sound echoed from the mists behind them. The baying of wolves, familiar, hungry, and full of hate. "Tiberius," Elowen whispered, her scent of wildflowers turning to the sharp, electric smell of ozone. A dozen elite warriors of the Blood Oak pack emerged from the fog, led by her father. Tiberius looked half-crazed, his eyes bloodshot, and his skin grey with the effort of the climb. He held a massive, enchanted crossbow, the bolts shimmering with a sickly green light. "You can't hide from me, girl," Tiberius roared. "The magician gave me the scent. He told me the shadow would try to keep the power for himself." Zarek stepped in front of Elezen, his obsidian blade singing as it cleared its sheath. "You have no place here, Tiberius. You have defiled your own blood. Leave now, or your soul will never find the path to the Great Wolf." "I don't need the Great Wolf," Tiberius screamed. "I need the king's power. Kill the shadow. Bring me the map." The warriors charged, their forms shifting mid-air into massive, mangy wolves. Zarek met them with a ferocity that was purely animal. He was a whirlwind of black fur and flashing steel, his sword cutting through bone and hide with a speed that left after-images in the thin air. But there were too many of them, and Tiberius was aiming the crossbow directly at Elowen. "If I cannot have the treasure," Tiberius hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger, "then I will break the map so no one can." He fired. The bolt hissed through the air, aimed directly for Elowen's chest. In that moment, Elowen didn't feel like an Omega. She felt the map on her skin burn white-hot. Her wolf didn't just whisper. She roared, "No!" Elowen didn't shift, but a shockwave of pure golden energy exploded from her skin. It was a physical wall of light that caught the bolt mid-air and turned the iron to ash. The force of the blast sent the remaining Blood Oak warriors flying over the edge of the chasm, their screams fading into the depths. Elowen fell to her knees, her vision blurring as the golden lines on her skin began to fade, turning a dull, lifeless grey. She felt as if her very soul was being pulled out through her pores. Zarek was at her side in an instant, dropping his sword to catch her. He ripped off his mask, his face twisted in a mask of pure agony. "Elowen, you used the life force. You used the map's core to save me." The mountain beneath them began to groan. A massive stone door at the end of the bridge started to grind upward, revealing a chamber filled with a pulsing blue starlight. The primal heart had opened, responding to the blood Elowen had spent. Zarek looked at the tomb, then at the woman dying in his arms. "We are here," he whispered, his golden eyes filled with a terrifying resolve. "And if I have to give my very existence to put the life back into your veins, I will do it. For you, my map. For you." In the distance, perched on a high rock, the silhouette of Adrian the magician watched with a cold, satisfied smile. The final trade was only minutes away. Chapter 8. The air inside the primal heart did not smell like the dust and decay of a tomb. It smelled of ancient ozone, frozen earth, and the faint, sweet aroma of Elowen's own fading life force. As Zarek carried her across the threshold, the massive stone doors ground shut with a sound that vibrated through Elowen's very teeth, cutting off the frantic howling of the Blood Oak warriors outside. Elowen felt the world tilting. The golden lines on her skin were now a ghostly, translucent silver, as if the ink were retreating into her bones to hide from the immense pressure of this place. Every breath she took felt like swallowing needles of ice, but Zarek's chest was a furnace against her side. "Put me down," she whispered. "Never," Zarek growled. His voice was no longer the steady command of a commander. It was a desperate, jagged plea. He held her against his heart, as if his own heat could stop the map from consuming her soul. He navigated the dark, cavernous hallway with a predator's grace, guided by a low, blue luminescence pulsing from the obsidian walls. Elowen watched the reflections of the golden marks on her arms dancing against the black stone. She realized then that the mountain wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was hungry for the map she carried. They emerged into a central chamber that stole what little breath Elowen had left. It was a cathedral of ice and shadow. In the center of a circular platform, surrounded by a moat of liquid starlight that churned like boiling silver, sat a throne carved from a single block of obsidian. And upon that throne sat King Bran. He was magnificent and terrifying. He was a statue of grey stone, captured in the middle of a war cry from a century ago. His hand was raised, clutching a phantom sword, and his features were identical to Zarek's, but harder, colder, and filled with a divine fury that made the air hum. Zarek stopped at the edge of the liquid moat. The reflection of the blue starlight made the scars on his jaw stand out in stark relief. He looked at the Stone King, then down at Elowen. The conflict in his gaze was a physical weight. "This is the end of the road, Elowen," Zarek said, his voice breaking. "The primal heart. My body. My prison. I have spent 100 years waiting to reach this room, dreaming of the moment I could finally be whole again." Elowen reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the surface of the glowing liquid in the moat. It felt like electricity and memory. "What happens when the map leaves me, Zarek? What happens to you when the king wakes up?" Zarek's golden eyes met hers, and for a fleeting, agonizing second, the commander vanished, and Elowen saw the soul of a man who was ready to be erased just to see her breathe one more time. "The shadow returns to the light, Elowen," he whispered. "I am his guilt, his love, and his memory. When he wakes, I will become part of him again. The memories of these weeks, the smell of your skin, the way your heart beats against mine. It will all be his, but the man you know as Zarek, he will cease to exist. He was only ever a bridge to bring the key to the lock." Chapter 9. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the chamber, broken only by the rhythmic bubbling of the liquid starlight. Elowen's wolf, now a distinct growling presence in the back of her mind, pushed against her consciousness with a ferocity she had never known. "Not him," the wolf whispered, a voice like a low-frequency hum. "We do not want the stone. We want the shadow. We want the one who bled for us." "I won't do it," Elowen gasped, her lungs burning as the map began to glow a violent, angry red. "I won't give you up to wake a ghost. I don't care about the king or the legends. You are the one who saved me from my father. You are the one who looked at me and saw a woman, not a tool." Zarek stepped toward her, his alpha power flaring, his scent of iron and smoke becoming so thick it was intoxicating. "Elowen, look at your skin. The magic is hollowed you out. If the king does not wake to reclaim the map, the power will explode inside you. You will turn into ash before the moon sets. I will not watch you die." He grabbed her wrists, his grip firm enough to bruise, but his touch still carrying that maddening, protective gentleness. The contact sent a violent surge of desire through Elowen's blood. It was the mate pull, amplified by the ancient magic of the tomb, demanding that the bond be sealed before the end. "Then claim me," Elowen challenged, her storm-grey eyes defiant even in her absolute weakness. She stepped into his space, her chest heaving against his. "If I am to die tonight, let it be as your mate, not as a key for a king who isn't even here. Mark me, Zarek. Let the gods see that I chose the shadow over the sun." Zarek let out a low, guttural snarl that shook the pillars of the room. He backed her against one of the obsidian columns, his body a wall of heat that made the fading lines on her skin glow a fierce, desperate crimson. He leaned in, his lips a breath away from the pulse point on her neck. Elowen could feel his fangs lengthening, grazing her skin with a lethal, erotic promise. "You are asking me to commit treason against my own existence," Zarek whispered, his breath hitching. "I am asking you to be real," she replied, her hands finding their way into his dark hair, pulling him closer, demanding the pain and the pleasure she had been denied her whole life. For a heartbeat, the world vanished. There was only the sound of their shared, ragged breath and the electric hum of the walls. Zarek tilted her head back, his eyes turning a predatory, molten gold. He was no longer a servant of the stone. He was a wolf claiming his soul. His teeth sank into her neck, not the shallow graze of a bodyguard, but the deep, soul-binding bite of a true alpha. Elowen screamed, but it wasn't a sound of agony. It was a roar of power The golden lines on her skin exploded into a blinding white-hot radiance. The magic didn't flow into the throne, as the legends said it should. It flowed into Zarek. The chamber shook. The liquid starlight in the moat began to boil and rise. Through the bond, Elohun felt Zarek's mind opening to her, like a book. A century of loneliness, 1,000 battles fought in the dark, and a sudden blinding love for her that eclipsed his duty to the king. She felt her own wolf finally break free of the map, a silver creature of starlight that leaped from her heart and into Zarek's soul. They were no longer two separate beings. They were one storm. But as the light reached its peak, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. Chapter 10. "Oh, bravo! Truly, I haven't seen a performance this inspired in at least 2 centuries, a voice drawled, cutting through the magic like a cold blade. The light dimmed, revealing Adrian the magician standing on the edge of the platform. He looked entirely out of place in his purple velvet coat, his messy copper hair catching the blue glow of the tomb. He held a small, silver mirror in his hand, idly polishing the glass with his sleeve. Zarek pulled back from Elohun's neck, his muzzle stained with her golden blood. He stood in front of her, his obsidian sword already in his hand, a feral growl vibrating in his chest. "You were warned, Adrian. This tomb is forbidden to your kind." "And you were lied to, my dear commander," Adrian replied, his voice shifting from playful to deathly serious. He pointed the mirror at the Stone King Bran, who remained frozen on the throne. "Did you really think the curse was about a split king? No, Bran wasn't split. He was buried." Elohun clutched her throat, the claiming mark burning with a new, strange heat. "What are you talking about?" Adrian stepped closer, the snow on his boots turning to steam. "A century ago, King Bran fell in love with a human. His pack, your ancestors, Zarek, feared he would make a human his Luna. So they hired a magician, a man very much like me, to turn the king to stone. But they couldn't kill his wolf, so they bound it to a shadow, a servant who was forced to hunt for a way to break a curse that was never meant to be broken." Zarek stiffened, his grip on the sword faltering. "I am his wolf?" "You are his humanity, Zarek," Adrian said, his green eyes glinting with a mix of pity and malice. "The part of him that can love, and that map on Elohun's skin. It wasn't a guide to a treasure. It was a timer. Once it reaches the king's heart, it will shatter the stone, and it will shatter the woman who carried it." Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the stone doors of the tomb. The sound of iron-tipped bolts and the frantic howling of wolves echoed down the hall. "Tiberius!" Elohun whispered, her scent of wildflowers turning to the sharp smell of smoke and betrayal. "He's here, and he has the magician's bolts," Adrian said, stepping back into the shadows. "He doesn't want to save the king. He wants to harvest your blood, Elohun. He thinks if he drinks the map's core, he will become an immortal alpha. He's going to kill your shadow and turn you into a trophy." The doors burst open. Alpha Tiberius stormed in, his eyes glowing a sickly, magical green. He held his heavy crossbow, aimed directly at Zarek's chest. A dozen blood oak warriors followed him, their fangs bared. "The freak and the ghost!" Tiberius roared, his voice echoing with madness. "Give me the map, or I'll burn this mountain to the ground, with you inside it." Elohun looked at the Stone King, then at Zarek, the man who was only a fragment, but was everything to her. She felt her wolf pacing, a deep, ancient wisdom finally surfacing. The map wasn't just a guide, it was a choice. "Zarek," Elohun said, her voice echoing with a power that made even Adrian flinch. "Don't look at him. Look at me. We are the ones who decide how this story ends. Chapter 11. The air inside the tomb of the primal heart curdled. The sharp, clean scent of Zarek's iron and wood smoke was being choked out by the foul, chemical odor of the green magic coating Tiberius's bolts. Elowen could feel the discord in her very bones, the ancient magic of the mountain recoiling from her father's presence. Zarek stood before her, a wall of midnight scarred muscle. He didn't look at the crossbow leveled at his chest. He looked back at Elowen, his molten gold eyes searching hers with a desperate intensity. Through the raw, fresh link of their claiming bond, she felt his mind, not as a collection of thoughts, but as a storm of protective rage. He was the shadow, the humanity, the part of a king that had learned to love in the darkness. "Step aside, you hollow ghost!" Tiberius roared, his voice cracking with a madness that made the blue starlight of the chamber flicker. "That girl is my property. Her blood is the currency I will use to buy this world." Zarek's response was a sound that didn't belong to a human or a wolf. It was a hollow, tectonic growl that vibrated through the obsidian floor. "You speak of property, Tiberius," Zarek rasped, his voice echoing with the authority of the century he had spent as a sentinel. "But you have forgotten the first law of the wild. An alpha does not own his pack, he serves it. You are no leader. You are a parasite. And today, the mountain has decided to stop feeding you." Tiberius's finger jerked on the trigger. 3 bolts, trailing a sickly emerald light, hissed through the air. They were designed to rot a shifter's soul, to turn their internal wolf into stagnant ash before they could even let out a final howl. Elowen's wolf, the silver creature she had finally claimed as her own, didn't just whisper this time. She screamed, "Ours! Protect the soul!" Elowen didn't think. She didn't have time for fear to paralyze her. She stepped out from the shelter of Zarek's broad shoulders and raised her hands, her palms facing her father. The golden lines on her skin, once a passive guide for the greedy, became a conduit. A shockwave of pure, blinding solar energy erupted from her chest, catching the green bolts mid-air. The sound was like a thunderclap in the small chamber. The green magic hissed and died against Elowen's light, the iron bolts turning to dust before they could touch Zarek's skin. The effort drained her, her legs turning to lead, but the map on her skin stayed bright, a fierce, defiant gold that made her look like she was made of sunlight. She saw the shock on Tiberius's face, the realization that the defective daughter he had bled in a dungeon was now the most powerful being in the room. "Kill them!" Tiberius screamed to his remaining warriors. "Kill the shadow, and bring me her heart while it still glows." The Blood Oak warriors charged, their forms shifting mid-air into massive, mangy wolves. But Zarek was no longer fighting for a king. He didn't know. He was fighting for his mate. He met the first wolf in the air, his obsidian sword slicing through bone and fur with a speed that left only a blur of shadow. He was a whirlwind of violence, a silent predator that could not be caught. But as the battle raged, Elowen saw her father drawing a silver dagger from his belt, the same blade he had used to draw her blood for years. He wasn't looking at the battle. He was looking at the Stone King Bran on the throne. "If I cannot have the power," Tiberius hissed, lunging toward the obsidian throne, "then I will shatter the god myself." Chapter 12. "No!" Elowen's voice tore from her throat, raw and powerful. She lunged forward, ignoring the fire in her muscles and the dizziness in her head. She reached the obsidian platform, just as Tiberius raised the silver blade to strike the stone face of King Bran. Without a second of hesitation, Elowen threw herself between the statue and her father. The silver blade didn't hit stone. It sliced deep into Elowen's forearm, the very arm where the map's strongest ley line resided. The chamber went silent. Even the wolves stopped fighting. Elowen's blood didn't run red. It ran molten gold. The moment the first drop of her blood touched the obsidian throne, the entire mountain seemed to let out a collective, ancient breath. The liquid starlight in the moat surged upward, forming a pillar of fire that reached the cavern's ceiling. Zarek let out a roar of agony, dropping to his knees. Elowen felt the bond between them begin to pull with a violent, soul-tearing force. She looked at him, her vision blurring, and saw his form beginning to shimmer and fade. "Elowen, it's happening," Zarek rasped, his hand reaching for her. "The stone is reclaiming its heart. I am going home." Adrian the magician appeared on the edge of the platform, his emerald eyes reflecting the golden fire. "The choice is here, True Luna. Let the shadow die and be reborn as the king's soul. Or stop the ritual now and watch Zarek fade into nothingness as your blood leaves your body. You cannot keep both." Elowen looked at her bleeding arm, then at the statue of King Bran, then at Zarek, the man who had carried her through the snow, the man whose scent had become her only sanctuary. She felt her wolf pacing in her mind, a deep, ancient wisdom finally breaking through the fear. "The shadow is not the guilt," her wolf growled. "The shadow is the love he thought he didn't deserve." "He doesn't have to die," Elowen shouted, her voice echoing with a power that made the obsidian walls vibrate. She reached back and grabbed the cold, stone hand of King Bran, while keeping her other hand outstretched toward Zarek. "I accept it all," she cried out to the mountain. "I accept the king's power and the shadow's love. I am the map, and I am the path. I command you to be whole." The golden lines on her skin began to detach from her flesh. They didn't wither. They became threads of pure light, weaving a bridge between the Stone King and the Shadow Commander. Elowen felt herself being hollowed out. It was an exquisite, terrifying pain, like being rebuilt from the atom up. She saw Zarek's form begin to blur and stretch, his features melting into the stone face of the king. The scars on Zarek's jaw began to fade from the statue. The coldness on Bran's face began to soften into Zarek's gentleness. Tiberius tried to strike again, his face a mask of greed, but the golden threads caught him. They bound his limbs, the magic of the true Luna judging his soul. He shriveled in the presence of the light, his internal wolf howling in terror, until he was nothing more than a broken, nameless old man on the floor. Elowen's vision started to go black. The last thing she felt was a pair of hands, warm, solid, and real, catching her before she could hit the obsidian floor. The scent was perfect, mountain pine, cold iron, and a new, sweet note of home. Chapter 13. Elowen woke to a sensation she hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. Silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of her dungeon cell, nor the magical humming silence of the obsidian tomb. This was a living silence. She felt the weight of heavy, sun-warmed furs draped over her body. She smelled the air. It was no longer sharp with the scent of frozen stone. Instead, it was rich with the aroma of fresh cedar, wild honey, and the first damp earth of spring. She didn't open her eyes immediately. She wanted to savor the lack of pain. For years, the golden ink on her skin had felt like a slow fire, a constant reminder that she was a vessel being drained. Now, her skin felt cool, quiet. Slowly, she lifted her arm from beneath the furs. She let out a soft, shaky breath. The golden lines were gone. Her skin was pale, smooth, and unblemished. The map that had defined her existence, that had made her a freak and a prize, had finally let go. But as she touched her bare arm, she realized she wasn't empty. Deep in the center of her chest, a new warmth was blooming. It wasn't the frantic pulse of magic, it was a heartbeat. A second, heavier heartbeat that mirrored her own. "We are whole," a voice purred in her mind. Ellawen's eyes flew open, her wolf. The silver creature was no longer a whisper in the gold. She was there, resting in the back of Ellawen's consciousness, her tail thumping a steady, rhythmic greeting. Ellawen wasn't just a human anymore. She was a true Luna. The sound of a heavy wooden door latch clicking made her turn. A man stepped into the room, and for a moment, Ellawen's heart stopped. He was taller than Zarek had been, his presence so commanding that the shadows in the room seemed to retreat from him. He was the perfect union of the two beings she had seen in the tomb. He had Zarek's rugged warrior's frame, and King Bran's effortless, godlike authority. He wore a simple white linen shirt, unbuttoned at the throat. There, right at the base of his neck, was a faint, shimmering tracing of gold. Not a bite, but a singular, elegant line from the map. It was the mark of the anchor she had created when she bridged his two halves. It was the proof that his soul now belonged to the woman who had guided him home. "You're awake," he said. His voice was a deep, melodic rumble that vibrated in Ellawen's very marrow. It was the voice of the shadow who had loved her in the snow, now reinforced with the power of a king. "Bran," Ellawen whispered. She tried to sit up, but her limbs were still heavy with the exhaustion of the ritual. He was at her side in a heartbeat, his large hands reaching out to steady her. His touch was no longer cold, like the iron Zarek had carried. It was the warmth of a summer afternoon. He sat on the edge of the bed, his golden eyes, the eyes that matched her own new power, searching her face with an intensity that made her skin hum. "I remember everything, Ellawen," Bran said, his thumb grazing her lower lip. "A century of being stone, the cold, the loneliness, and then a scent like rain and wildflowers, a voice that refused to let the shadow go." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "They called you a map to a treasure. They were fools. You were the map to the only part of me that mattered." Ellawen reached up, her fingers trembling as she touched the golden mark at his throat. "The others? My father. Is it over?" Bran's expression hardened into the look of a king who had just reclaimed his throne. "The Blood Oak Pack has fallen. Your father lives, but only so he can watch from a cell as you rule the land he tried to steal. The winter is breaking, Ellawen. The ice is melting from the mountains, and the tribes are already gathering at the gates. They have heard the song of the true Luna, and they are coming to swear their lives to you." He pulled her closer, his scent of pine and iron enveloping her. Ellawen realized then that her life as an outcast was over. She wasn't a freak, and she wasn't a tool. "You saved me from the stone," Bran whispered, his lips brushing against the claiming mark he had given her in the tomb. "And now I will spend the rest of my days making sure you never feel the cold again." As he kissed her, Ellawen felt the final piece of the map click into place. The journey was over. She had led the king out of the darkness, and in return, he had given her the one thing she never thought she'd have: a home. And so, the stars that were once a curse became a legacy. Ellawen and Bran built a kingdom where strength was measured by compassion, and where the smallest wolf was given the highest seat. Thank you so much for joining me for the end of Ellawen and Bran's long journey. This story has been a labor of love, and I hope it stayed with you as much as it stayed with me. I have a question for you tonight. If you were the Alpha King, would you have chosen to stay a shadow to be with Elowen, or become a king and risk losing her? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Every click helps me bring these stories to life. I'll see you in the next one.
Love, Amy.